And truth be told, I to me botched that a little bit. What I ought to have done, hindsight's 2020. Those messages that I preached they were messages I like to preach, and they're out of the Bible, and they were good and encouraging, but they really weren't about Calvinism. But it would have helped the conversation if I had just gone into those places and preached on.
Pulled a pin on the grenade, dropped it in there, and then
preach 1 John 2:2 and let's go.
Yeah.
But if I had to do that over again, I probably would have been more pointed.
Welcome to the Provisionist Perspective, a very special episode, mind you. I'm Drew.
And I'm Eric. And on today's program, we have another Eric, Dr. Eric Hankins, with us, and he has graciously agreed to do an interview with us, to join us on the program. We're going to talk about various things. This episode in particular, we're going to introduce him as a voice in the Provisionist, Traditionalist, whosoever will, Soteriological movement, and what he is up to, the kinds of things that influenced him, and where he landed where he is. So without further ado, let's bring on Dr. Eric Hankins. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Glad to be here.
Welcome. I see that Eric is getting his Southern on with the sir there, or is that a usual?
Honorific. Yeah, you got to have it. You got to do the honorific.
Yeah. Brother Eric, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your ministry, and your educational background to kind of let people in on who you are and what you do?
Yeah. I grew up in a pastor's home. My dad's a pastor, just retired from ministry, from denominational ministry. The last part of his career was as a leader, the executive director of all the Baptist work in Louisiana. So Dad led me to Christ and discipled me. And so I grew up in a home where the gospel was at the center of things. Mom and Dad loved the Lord, loved ministry. And so when I was 18, felt God's call to ministry. I'd also met the beautiful young lady that would become my wife when we were in junior high at church. And so at 18, I started to ministry. At 20, we were married and off at school together. I got a degree in religion, a BA in religion from Louisiana College, and then went on to get an MDiv in biblical languages from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and then a PhD in systematic theology from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. Janet and I have 3 children. In fact, our first grandbaby is due anytime. So we're thrilled about that. So my son is a youth pastor, and he and my daughter-in-law are expecting their first child. Then my daughter is also in ministry. She's a children's minister, and she's working on a master's degree in counseling. And then I have a 17-year-old son who's at youth camp right now with our church. And I am now pastor of the First Baptist Church in Fairhope, Alabama, where I've been almost 5 years. Before that, I was in Oxford, Mississippi for 12 years. And that's where my traditionalist journey began in earnest in those years in Oxford.
And great. Can you tell us just a little bit about your theological journey and just kind of how you arrived where you are now soteriologically? Starting in Oxford, Mississippi, I guess.
Sure. And,
right. Wherever you want to start.
Sure. Obviously was engaged theologically intensely through doctoral work and had great experience at Southwestern. But Calvinism and soteriological issues were not really at the center of what was going on. I was I was getting my education in the midst of the conservative resurgence. So biblical inerrancy was really what we were talking about and thinking about engaging. But I found that after several years in Oxford, I was in such a university context, I started getting pushback. In fact, I had a conversation with a young church member who had a transformative experience through Passion and through John Piper, and I was hearing more and more about John Piper. But it's the first time I'd ever had someone. Actually, what the guy did is he questioned whether or not I really was preaching the gospel. That really put me back on my heels, and we got into the discussion of Calvinism, and I knew what it was, but I found that my typical articulation of its problems didn't seem to mean anything to this guy, and he just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming, and I was I was giving the 3-point Calvinist strategy to answer him. And that also didn't seem sufficient. And so I, at that point, really started doing an investigation, found very quickly that 3-point Calvinism is a bad way to think about this. And so when you have a bad theological strategy, you're already in trouble. So in 2010, I wrote a paper called Beyond Arminianism and Calvinism Towards a Baptist Soteriology. And so that really got things moving. And so, and that sort of laid out what I wasn't, but that raised then the question, well, what am I? What do I believe? If I'm not a 3-point Calvinist and I don't want to get off that grid, that's really where I developed that idea. Let's get off this Augustinian Calvinist synthesis that everybody thinks we're beholden to. I'm not, man, I'm a Baptist. I believe the Bible. I don't care what Augustine thinks. Nobody I know cares about what Augustine, nobody I respect growing up ever mentioned the guy. I'm not beholden to him. So I thought, well, what would it look like if I just laid out what would be the platform or the planks in a platform for what I believe about how we get saved? And so I started that. That was mainly in conversation with my dad. And so probably the biggest influencer, certainly in the early days, was my dad and his preaching, which would have been a traditionalist. Adrian Rogers, Jerry Vine, the preachers, Jimmy Draper, the Gospel for All, evangelistic, Billy Graham, Bobby Welsh, who was doing faith evangelism. Anyone can be saved. And so everyone needs to hear the gospel. So what would that look like if I started to articulate that in a more carefully articulated, systematic, theological kind of way? And so started that conversation with Dad, and then Adam Harwood, my friend, who's now head of the theology department at New Orleans Seminary, Steve Lemke, who's the provost emeritus there at New Orleans, David Allen, who's at Southwestern, Malcolm Yarnell, who's at Southwestern. We started batting those articles, which is what the traditional statement is laid out in articles, affirmations and denials, and kick that around. And literally, I am not making this up, over about 6 weeks, we generated the traditional statement.
Wow. That's pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just a thought experiment. It was just an exercise to say, well, I'm not a 5-point Calvinist. And also what people would do is they'd say, well, okay, so we need our 5 points. And one day, why is it 5? Why? And why should they be in answer?
Provisionists have 7. I'm just saying.
Oh, very good, because that's a biblical number. That's
the complete number. That's right.
Very good. Right. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So we felt better and better and better about it. And then memory serves, Dad shared it with Jerry Vines, who was also beginning to be concerned about this rise of Calvinism. And he really liked it and said, can I hand this around? What if we got guys to sign it? And so if memory serves correct, I think it was Jerry Vines' idea. Well, why don't we have some people kind of affirm it? Well, I thought, great. And well, it turns out Jerry Vines knows some people. And so
and then it started getting out of control.
Yeah. And then SBC Today, a blog that Steve Lemke was running at the time, put the statement up and put the signatures, and it blew up. I can't remember the exact statistic, but for a few days, SBC Today was like top 10 in the world religious blogs or something like that. The traffic was enormous. I think the blog site crashed a couple of times or something. Anyway, it was wild what happened. Within days, Al Mohler had written a response to it, which
yeah.
So beyond what we expected for it to do, and it just took off from there.
And helping connect some of the timeline on this, just for me, is it so? I just watched an interview, speaking of Al Mohler, that you had with him on the Southern Baptist Convention and Theology, where you guys were sitting across from one another. I think that was in 2014.
That sounds right. It was the release of that, and then there was a convention. I think it was the convention in New Orleans, where the Calvinism Advisory Committee got put together by Frank Page, and then we worked on trying to generate some sort of statement out of that. But I also got to know Al Mohler and Danny Aiken. I was an acquaintance with them, but out of that, some invitations to preach and speak on those campuses, and so that's what that interview is from. So 2014 sounds. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm. So they were engaging with not just your statement, but also with you, and inviting you to come on and have some dialogues and preach. And
it was, but the truth is, it was sort of in service of we're friends, and we are friends. I'm not saying we weren't friends, but it was in service of this. Let's all get along. No, nothing to see here. We're all, 6 one, half does the other, and truth be told, I to me botched that a little bit. What I ought to have done, hindsight's 2020. Those messages that I preached they were messages I like to preach, and they're out of the Bible, and they were good and encouraging, but they really weren't about Calvinism. I may have touched on them at different places, but I'd already, again, guys, it's just this struggle back and forth.
Yeah.
You don't want people to be mad at you, and you don't, and it sounds nice to, let's all hug and that sort of thing. But it would have helped the conversation if I had just gone into those places and preached on.
Pulled a pin on the grenade, dropped it in there, and then
preach 1 John 2:2 and let's go. But if I had to do that over again, I probably would have been more pointed.
That's got to be pretty tough, though, because everyone is saying to you, let's pull back a little bit. And it's hard not to, because there's wisdom in that, right? There's wisdom in not throwing grenades everywhere.
Sure.
and so, it sounds wise at the time, and I could see how that'd be really tough if I was the one, wondering how far to push this envelope.
Right. And there was, because everything went so suddenly, in the early days after the release of the traditional statements, all these conspiracies that, this had been being planned for years, and this was to get
you're like 6 weeks.
6 weeks, and then no structure. There was no group. There was no plan. There was no organization that existed. Honestly, people never believe me when I say that, but that's the truth. It was me and my computer. It was the relationships that helped it a great bit. So some of it's just, you couldn't have planned it. It just, these elements came together at the right time. But what everybody knows is, if it wasn't a big deal to a lot of people, that thing would have been interesting for 15 minutes and just on to the next thing. But I put my finger on something that was bothering everybody. And then the goal became for the powers that be to change that narrative, that nobody's bothered by this and everything's fine. And why are we making a big deal out of this? Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned your dad. So he was one mentor figure that you had that was speaking from a provisionistic, traditionalist, whosoever will type of theology. Were there any other mentors that have helped you on your journey with regards to all of this?
Sure. And I've already mentioned them. So my friendship with Adam Harwood, Adam and I went all the way through doctoral work together. And so actually when he was working on his prospectus for his PhD, he was on the fate of infants. And I was always giving Adam a hard time about stuff. So I'm like, the fate of infants? That's a terrible topic. I mean, it's weird. Why have you chosen that? And Adam is he's the best guy in the world. He's so smart and just earnest and caring heart. He said, no, Eric, this is going to really push into the issue of original sin and the role that freedom play. And he was right. It was a brilliant investigation, and really takes total depravity apart, and it puts its finger down on a hard pastoral issue, which is, I have some of the most hard days of ministry have been on the occasions I've had to go to the hospital when there's been a stillbirth, and you walk into that room, and man, you talk about pain, and a mother looks at me, and what does the mother want to know?
You're right.
That's
right.
Where's
my baby? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say 50-50.
Yeah. Right.
I couldn't say.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why this stuff is so important.
Yeah.
And this, right? It's very practical. It's very rubber meets the road. And, on a personal note, our viewers will know that last year, our baby girl was born very premature. So she was born 1 pound, 2.5 ounces at 26 weeks or so. And we saw, on a number of occasions, babies not make it, one mother of which Kirsty and I had befriended and stuff. And that's, it's really challenging. So,
yeah. And so that brings it down to the level of pastoral ministry and caring well for people and telling people the truth. So Adam's
absolutely
was inestimable, and then through it all, he just when it was unpopular what we were saying and doing, he just held the line and was kind and gracious, but strong as an ox. And so that friendship with Adam Harwood has been and is huge. My connection to Steve Lemke and the book Whosoever Will. So I would recommend that. Whosoever Will.
Okay.
It was edited by Lemke and then David Allen. I got to know David Allen.
Did you contribute to that as well? I read Anyone Can Be Saved, but I've not read that one.
And I can't remember the date that Whosoever Will was published, but it was published before the traditional statement.
Okay.
So it was a resource I used to help me think through the whole issue. Very, very, very important. Then David Allen has gone on to write a book on limited atonement, 600 page, just a
magnum opus
of atonement. And I watched David Allen take Mark Dever and Al Mohler. He just in this Calvinism advisory committee, David's kind of like a nice machine gun. He's got all 500 pages committed to memory, and they would try to, Andrew Fuller didn't believe it. I mean, he just chapter and verse, just mantles it. And so really to me, there's nothing left of limited atonement. And limited atonement, historically, Baptists have never wanted it. Yeah. Never been comfortable with it. They know instinctively it's wrong. They know 1 John 2:2 makes limited atonement impossible to justify biblically. And David's done a great job of taking that apart. So, and then Ken Keithley's book, Salvation and Sovereignty. I've only ever met Ken just a couple of times, but the book was hugely influential. And Roger Olson, who's an Arminian, but he wrote a book called Against Calvinism. It's just a great, polemic, smart, devastating. And so that book was very helpful to me as well.
It's interesting you mentioned Keithley's book, because I got a hold of that from a friend of mine who was taking classes at Southeastern. I'm from that area. I'm from the Raleigh area. And this must have been just before the traditionalist statement came on my radar, because I didn't know what to call myself. And I thought, I read this book and I found myself agreeing with a lot of it, but then disagreeing with a fair bit of it as well. And I would tell people as a result of reading that book, I think that I'm a Molinist. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I think that might be the closest to what I am. And I didn't really, Molinism is really more of a position on divine foreknowledge, and his was like a Molinist approach to salvation, so which I then learned later after calling myself Molinist when people corrected me on it. But yeah, it's a good resource as well.
It is, and it's what attracted me to Molinism, and so that's where I would land on the issue of divine foreknowledge and that sort of thing. Keithley, and then really what sealed it for me was William Lane Craig. So will be another very influential thinker and book that I rely on. And once again, Craig's, he just wipes determinism out, which is what this is all about anyway.
Right.
I would encourage listeners, when you want to have this is what I found worked with Calvinists. In the first 3 seconds, say, I'm not a determinist. That's why I don't believe in Calvinism, because I'm not a determinist. And they go, that's what this is about.
And it's funny because a lot of people don't know that it entails that. That is a really important foundational tenet to the system. So,
because I think a lot of your kind of normie Reformed Christians, what Calvinism is to them is whatever their Reformed pastor preaches from the pulpit, or their favorite internet pastor that they watch preaches from the pulpit. And they're not. They sound like Arminians. They sound like traditionalist Provisionists when they preach. So, I can see how that'd be confusing.
Yeah, read Tim Keller. Read a book of his that I really appreciate, The Reason for God.
Yeah,
you can find a whisper of Calvinism in that.
No.
Yeah, right.
I love Tim Keller because he doesn't talk like one. So I love Tim Keller. It's I know it's there, and I'm always like,
great. You got this great theological system that you'd never mention. How great is it?
Yeah, once you figure out some of the code language, you can see it in there, but it's not clear. Yeah.
And so and again, in discussions, and I had a discussion with a guy where I push in on determinism, and so I said, on your view, God meticulously foreordained the deaths of 6 million Jews. Well, I just believe God, is sovereign over all things, so that everything comes to pass according to His direction, or whatever arrangement of those sentences you get. And I just kept pushing. So you do affirm that God meticulously foreordained the deaths of 6 million Jews, so that it could not be otherwise from before the foundations of the world. I just believe God's, and that kind of thing. I said, but I want you to answer this question. Did God meticulously foreordain the deaths of 6 million Jews?
Like a dog with a bone.
This meticulously foreordained the rape and murder of children, so that it could not be otherwise from eternity past. And finally, I got
it up and then brought it to pass.
Yeah. And finally, well, on my view, yes. I said, then preach that Sunday morning. Tell your folks that from your pulpit Sunday morning. Silence. I don't have theological views, but I can't preach from my pulpit.
That's a really interesting point, actually. I've never. I mean, the concept of they're not upfront with it, but the idea that you would believe something is the truth, but no, you also couldn't preach it from the pulpit. That's amazing.
So what passages, or you've talked about 1 John 2:2 so far as an unlimited extent of the atonement, God's love and provision for everyone. And but what is a passage or some passages that have been foundational to believing as you do soteriologically, that have been, I guess, for lack of a better term, impactful to you?
Gotcha. At the risk of being enormously cheeky, the Bible, the whole Bible. And
Genesis to Revelation.
If you just read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, would you, and did not have any theological preconditioning, would you derive that the theme of the Bible is God chooses some and not others? That's the message of the Bible. That God chooses some and not others, and that choice is not based on anything having to do with them, including their own choice.
And to,
The answer.
and to
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and to provide some clarity to our viewers, and maybe some people that would want to unpack that further, chooses unto salvation, and not others, because for instance, and we could get into this, and we've talked about this. God does choose some, Jacob, Abraham, and so on, and not others. But does He choose them salvifically to the neglect of others? And I guess our viewers know that, but Eric and I have this ongoing joke of this voice in our heads. It's like, well, actually,
right.
He does, it's like, so to just head that off at this is what we're talking about here, but yeah. So the Bible.
And I get that point, and that's why we're having the debate, is because you run into passages like Romans 9 and go, whoa, what does that mean? But
Sure.
My point is this: that the message and the flow and the emphasis of the Bible is that our choices matter, that God loves this world He made and loves people and wants to have an eternal relationship with them, and that's for everybody.
Yeah, one of the main themes of the Old Testament is loving kindness, God's loving kindness. Do a word search for loving kindness and just see how much of a theme it is, and then wonder how that fits in with God immutably choosing the vast majority of humanity to not be saved, to go to hell.
Correct. And even in the Old Testament, where you can certainly read plenty about judgment, all right? It's not like that's not mentioned, and God's wrath and His anger towards sin, but it is His response to human choices, to the human beings' misuse of their freedom, and then their rightly deserved punishment for those things.
If you do this, then I will do this. But if you don't do this, then I'll do this.
Right. Choose life, choose the day whom you will serve. That seems to me what's going on from beginning to end. And then scriptures, it would just be the ones that that seem so clear. So John 3:16, 1 John 2:2 is Christ died not for our sins only, but for the sins of the whole world. Ooh, that's pretty clear. 1 Peter 2:9, God doesn't desire for any to perish, but all to become to eternal life. Those statements of God's salvific desire for all to be saved.
What about some of the opposite statements? Things that if you just read it in a single phrase or a single soundbite or a single tweet or something, that kind of gives you the most difficulty in how you understand soteriology. What were some of those that hit you as you first went on this journey in Oxford, Mississippi, and then how did you kind of overcome some of that?
Yeah, the big one is Romans 9. That's what the Calvinist is going to go. That's their go-to passage. You have Jacob I loved, Esau I hated, vessels of wrath, vessels of mercy. And I wrestled so long, I ended up writing a peer-reviewed paper for Journal of Baptist Theology Ministry that was went out maybe 2-3 years ago, something like that. So I really had to wrestle with that. And actually, what it resulted in is you have to rethink all of Romans. But as I think I've said in other places, I really think the trajectory of New Testament scholarship, especially with what's going on in Anglo-American New Testament scholarship, a la N.T. Wright, is the scholarship's moving away from Calvinism. It essentially makes that Augustinian view of Romans 9 impossible, because Wright helps and others help us to see the letter to Romans as a whole, and Romans 9 through 11 then is the climax of the letter, but it fits in with the entirety of Paul's letter. So I had to do some wrestling over that, but it was a fantastic exploration, and I feel more secure in a gospel for all, salvation for all view of soteriology now that I've done that hard look at Romans 9. Yeah,
the new perspective, so to speak, and N.T. Wright doesn't really like that name, but I think if there's one thing that I've appreciated from it with how complicated that gets, and they all differ with each other, like Dunn and Sanders, and right, they all differ with each other, is that really Sanders, I think, showed that Paul simply in Romans 9 or Galatians, he doesn't have in mind this religion that's based on works. It's just not there. The rabbinic tradition never thought that. He's not contrasting this works of the law with the works of faith. He's not doing that where they believed that they were earning their salvation. There's zero evidence that the rabbis of Jesus' day and before believed that at all. And so what is Paul talking about if he's not talking about that? And that goes down a whole other rabbit hole. So, right.
I can't remember exactly where Alistair McGrath said it. I can pull the quote later if you want me to, but Alistair McGrath, okay,
yeah,
he knows what he's talking about. Says if N.T. Wright is correct, then Martin Luther is wrong. I mean, I can pull you that sentence. That's what we're talking about, and so that's a big statement. And when that puts the understanding of what Paul's up to on a completely different footing, and so it's hard to get your mind around it, but tough. That's when you take Paul seriously, you have to let Paul say what he's saying, not what Augustine says. He's saying.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to distill the difficulty is that E.P. Sanders wrote Paul and Palestinian Judaism, right? It's dense. I had a really hard time getting through it. It's just page after page after page of him going through rabbinic literature, and it's dry and all that. And these other guys are distilling it down. And now N.T. Wright has this sort of name where people go, oh, I'm like, N.T. Wright, I don't know if I can get on board with an Anglican bishop, but you have to just, Sanders showed it that there is no basis for this idea. And so the question remains, where did this idea specifically that the Jews of Jesus' day, the rabbis of Jesus' day were teaching that you earn your salvation through works. If that idea isn't real, then Luther's wrong.
Right. And as I understand it, and New Testament studies is a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but I've heard the theory posited this way, that what Martin Luther was doing was he was reading Roman Catholic works righteousness back into the New Testament, because what you have by the late medieval period is Roman Catholic works righteousness. I mean, that's what it is, and it was destroying the church, and justification by faith alone needed to be trumpeted, and that was all right. But it was riding in on the rails of Luther's reading of that distortion of the gospel back into the way Judaism was to be understood.
Yeah, and I think that I love what you said earlier, which was I wanted to get off of this grid, right? I want to get off of this Augustine Reformed grid. I think part of that grid is that you're always fighting the Catholic fight from 500 years ago. That they're continuing to fight that fight, even though that's irrelevant now. That's not what we're dealing with in the church now. That's not what's going on. And yeah, he read it back in, and they've been doing it ever since.
Right. And so I'll toss this in. So keep that in mind when people call you semi-Pelagian. And what I've learned to do is just say, no, we're not going down that road. That is all that is a total misreading of everything, and trying to keep this thing on this late medieval loop that you want this whole discussion to remain on. And I won't phrase this right, but I think it's N.T. Wright who says you're trying to give 15th century answers to 13th century questions or something like that, when we need to be giving first century answers to 20th century questions, I think is the way Wright puts it. I just always loved that. But that's what that whole we're being forced to have late medieval arguments about early medieval controversies. I'm done with that. I don't have any interest in it. And nobody else does.
Eric and I's strategy for that is, okay, we're semi-Pelagians. Now tell us why we're wrong. Show us in the Bible.
and we're not.
Yeah.
No one is making the claim that we initiate the process of salvation. No one. So, exactly 0 people think that.
This is a side rant, okay? But what it boils down to in my discussions with people is how much of that definition of semi-Pelagianism do you have to affirm to be a semi-Pelagian, right? So, and I was having a conversation with somebody once, and I was basically just like, okay, so I'm a semi-Pelagian. I have like something sort of kind of in common with them. Fine. Let's move on.
And that really, and it's a theological fallacy. I think it's tu quoque is the nifty term for it.
Yeah.
You also, it's just not. It doesn't work. And and I just try to tell people, just move on from that. You don't even know what semi-Pelagianism is.
Yeah, and I love Harwood, Dr. Allen's destruction of it was just fantastic. So, yeah. All right. So if some of our listeners, and I bet many of our listeners fall into this category, are wanting to understand more provisionist perspectives on soteriology and kind of firm up their own biblical convictions of it, what resources would you recommend? I guess you gave some in your journey, but are there sort of other introductory texts that you think help get somebody to the place where they can read Allen's magnum opus?
Yeah, I would circle back to the ones I've already mentioned. I think Whosoever Will is a great introduction. I think Salvation and Sovereignty is a great introduction. Against Calvinism, really clearly, I think at a informed layman level, they could read that and grab, because these are hard concepts. When you're trying to help people understand the difference between soft libertarianism and hard libertarianism,
right,
and compatibilism and soft determinism, all those sorts of things that are very important to understand the distinctions. I think it's Jerry Walls that's at Houston Baptist University, calls it Reformed rhetoric. And so that's this, if you don't understand the nuance and the double speak and using the same words but have a completely different definition for them, you get lost, or you get defeated very quickly by the somewhat informed Calvinist. And so those are great books for getting an introduction, but a robust introduction.
What about Harwood's? Should we watch out for Harwood's systematic coming out? Is that going to be something that is going to be geared towards your theologically literate layman?
I think what Adam's up to in that is there's really not a good seminary level systematic that's not Calvinist on offer. And so what seminarians are going to get across the board is Grudem. Everybody's going to get Grudem.
Yeah.
If you don't get Grudem, you get Erickson. And here's the thing about my journey is I had Erickson. I didn't know Erickson was a Calvinist.
Right. I'm taking Theology 1 with Flowers right now while auditing it, and we have WGT Shed, as Brother David says, and then we have Thomas Oden. I've not actually heard that name before, but I'm a bit of a theological noob.
Yeah.
We had Michael Horton, who's Reformed. Horton was our along with Grudem. I mean, Grudem is like the standard at Biola. Anyway, he's still very much. I think they just hand his book. I have it somewhere. I think they just hand his book out for free. I think they just.
I think 500 million copies.
It's absurd.
I think that's actually right. It's nuts.
Yeah.
And I have Grudem on my shelf, and as especially as an encyclopedia, man, it's handy to you want angelology.
It's it's great.
Good solid stuff on it. But if he is a 5-point Calvinist, he is not hiding it. And That's what most seminarians now are getting, and it's game over once they roll through that. And so I think what Adam's hoping to do is to provide an alternative to that.
Okay, great. So we'll watch out for that.
I don't know that you're going to get many informed laymen who are going to pick up a 1,200 page systematic and go to it.
Maybe that's goals though, right? Maybe that's the goal. The goal is to get there and to get to that place where even in your own education, you can read a New Testament survey, you can read an Old Testament survey, you can get into some intro Theo books, and then get to where you're able to get to Harwood and do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, and I didn't mention the book that Harwood and David Allen and I edited called Anyone Can Be Saved, and it's a great introduction to these issues, and it just takes each one of the statements in the traditional statement.
Oh, okay.
Some chapters are better than others. I'll just I need to be honest, but all of them will get you going, and I think all of the chapters are very accessible.
Okay.
And if you're feeling strapped for cash, actually, all of those things are journals in the forget what it's called, Baptist Theological Journal, whatever, that you can actually access online. So if you're feeling strapped, you can find it on there. If not, and you want to support the cause, get you a copy. So
correct.
Not gonna lie, I bought it on Kindle and I was like, oh man, all of these are just articles. So here at the Provisionist Perspective, Eric and I are pretty convinced that sound doctrine is true and healthy doctrine for the church, and is something that we should obviously get behind and promote and teach not only ourselves, but also others. And so in light of this, what would be your encouragement or your challenge to, as I like to call them, normie Provisionist Christians, our viewers, as far as promoting a sound, healthy soteriology that exalts God's glory in his love and provision for everyone?
Yes, I think one of the things you're going to want to do is be real clear about something that I've always called the triad, the traditionalist triad. And Adam Harwood articulated this in a lecture he gave on election. I think it was the first time I heard it, simply put. And so you want to be able to say to your pastor, to your Sunday school teacher, to the college student that's come home from Passion and, now has everything all figured out. I believe that God loves everybody the same way. I believe Christ died for the sins of everyone. And I believe that anyone can be saved. So I believe God loves everyone. I believe Christ died for the sins of everyone. And I believe that anyone can be saved. And then you can say, do you believe that? And that starts a good conversation, because that's what it comes down to. And it really forces someone to just go ahead and say, well, I don't think that God loves everyone the same way. Well, I think a normie person is going to think, what?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not right. I don't think Christ died for this. Now, I've heard all the arguments, and so off they'll go into effectual and all the rigmarole. But you can always start with them back to. So what you're saying then is that Christ did not die for the sins of everyone. And all I'm telling you is when I teach this to people, ordinary people, but people who love the Bible, they studied it their whole lives, they're serious about it, they believe it, they think and they want to see other people's lives transformed by this gospel that sits at the center of the biblical revelation. They hear Christ didn't die for the sins of everyone. They're like, yeah, no way. God does not want everyone to be saved. They're like, absolutely no way. And I think you even ask people who think they're reformed, they're going to want to say yes to all three of those things. And I remember sitting in the Calvinism Advisory Committee and just saying to the group, I believe anyone can be saved. I believe anyone can be saved. And you sort of see everyone kind of, tighten up.
Wow.
Which is so grieves me to hear, and we're all aware of this, right? But this is part of the reason why we're doing the podcast is like, isn't that something that we should all be able to get behind? I was having a conversation with a mentor friend of mine the other day, and he was highlighting to me that I'm a little bit too obsessed with soteriology, and that maybe I needed to expand and get like a little bit of a bigger picture and type of thing, which I think, there's some truth in that. We can become too hyper focused and stuff, and so I have to maintain balance. But and my response was, this deals with pretty basic questions like, if someone hears the gospel, can they believe it? Can anyone be saved? Questions like what you've highlighted there. Like, it's pretty, we talk about soteriology 101. This is important stuff that I feel like should be completely uncontroversial, and is why when most of us encounter people who would want to say, well, hold on, we're like, huh? Like, I've been, that was my first experience, was like, I've been a Christian for many years now, and this is a unexpected response on this point. So you would say essentially that your response to that question is getting clarity surrounding these three questions with people, whether it's your pastor or Sunday school teacher or whatever, and beginning that conversation with them.
Right. So I would say clarity and then courage when there's pushback that says you're trying to start an argument, or the Reformed rhetoric starts. Well, I understand. I remember I said that I believe anyone can be saved, and then one of the Calvinists started to mansplain to me.
Reformed splain.
You can get me in trouble for laughing at this stuff, Eric.
And I said, stop. I said, stop. I said, I do not need for you to explain your position to me. I understand your position. It's not because I don't understand your position that I don't agree with you. It's because I do understand your position that I don't agree with you. And I'm telling you, when I said that, it was like, because what often Reformed people will do is, because they think they just think they're smarter, is the reason you don't believe what they believe is because you just haven't thought about it hard enough yet.
And maybe it's because also they haven't really had this sort of pushback. Correct. That they have enjoyed this ubiquitous hegemony over everything. And so there isn't a robust pushback from them. And so the first time they're really confronted with somebody that doesn't wilt, they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yep.
And I guess on that point, when that pushback comes, whoa, listen, you're just being divisive. Let's just unite around the gospel and so on. Let's keep the main thing. Let's not focus in on this. This is a secondary issue. Well, because that's inevitably the next, right, the next step from that pushback that you're going to have. What's your advice to a normie viewer regarding how to respond to that?
Yes, let's unite around the gospel. Now, what is the gospel? I'm ready to unite. What do you think the gospel is?
Yeah,
fair enough.
We need to have that conversation. And then here's the thing. Theology is rough and tumble. That's just how theology works. And so we're not going to get anywhere by not talking about areas of disagreement. That's what theology is. It's mixing it up. Now, you shouldn't kill each other. Christians needed to learn that,
Took us hundreds of years to figure that out.
Put each other on the rack. That's right. That's a bad idea. And they can't assassinate each other's character, doing things that are ungodly and fleshly and not Christ-like. But to have an honest and robust debate about these issues, that's how we got great Trinitarian theology. Without which the Christianity would have died out. We had to get after it. And so I'm all for not being ugly. I'm not all for not being trying to ruin each other's careers, ruin each other's lives, making threats and all that sort of thing. But let's have the whole conversation all the way, as far down as we can have it.
Being Christ-like with someone you disagree with could include turning over a table and fashioning a whip. I'm just saying.
So you can use a whip or a table.
Okay. Not a whip or a table.
You can't throw furniture. Right.
Okay. Can't throw furniture. No, that's perfect. But Jesus got really controversial though. He stirred it up on purpose. He knew what was going to make them mad, and he stirred it up anyway. And so that's not un-Christ-like behavior.
Yeah. And here's the deal. And I know Tom Askell and the Founders guys, they weren't nice on the front end. I didn't put that the right way. They weren't trying to be nice to everybody when they were very much in the minority.
That wasn't their main concern.
That wasn't their concern.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to be unchristian, but brother, they intended to have the conversations right in your face, and they intended to read their stuff. They intended for you to debate them on the merits of the case they were making. And they in fact, Founder still says, I don't want to get this exactly right, but restoring the church through a return to the doctrines of grace or something like that. I mean, they're all in. They're all in. And fair enough. I think you ought to be convictional about what you believe. But then that's the game we're playing. Is right. I'm going to be convictional about what I believe. I think the necessary implication of the belief system of Calvinism requires God to be the cause of evil. That makes Calvinists furious to hear. I'm sorry. We're going to have a conversation about it. Yeah. And I'm sorry that you don't like that, and that you say you don't. I'm glad you say you don't believe it, because to believe it would be heresy. But the problem is you cannot account for how the God of Calvinism is also not the God who causes evil, not in any kind of way I've been satisfied by. And so I'm just going to keep pushing that issue.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Eric, for that relatively quick rundown on your soteriological perspective and your background and kind of how you've gotten to where you are. And we appreciate you, and we hope to have you on again soon. So thanks for coming on, and hopefully we'll do a few more of these, fingers crossed. So both with yourself and hopefully with some other voices in the movement. So thanks again.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.